Good afternoon and welcome to our Beetaloo Basin webinar special. I am Paul Sanger from the Finance News Network and Share Cafe, and I will be your host for today's event. Due to the amount of presenters today, we will not have time for a live Q&A session. That said, please feel free to submit any questions you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, highlighting who the question is for, and make sure you add in your name, and we will forward the questions to the presenters post the webinar and send their replies to you individually. Today, we will be doing a deep dive into the evolving development of the world-class unconventional gas resource located in the Beetaloo Sub-Basin in Australia's Northern Territory. To really understand the opportunity the Beetaloo Basin represents, we'll be talking to some of the key stakeholders in the basin, including speakers representing the NT government, the Gas Taskforce, and exploration and development companies. It is becoming clear that the time for the Beetaloo Basin to take centre stage in the Australian energy sector has arrived. The macro conditions for the unconventional players in the Beetaloo Basin are aligning. With a deficit in NT gas supply that is continuing to deteriorate, gas from the Beetaloo Basin is desperately needed to support the needs of NT's Power and Water Corporation as supply from ENI's black tip continues to decline. Our recent conversations with NT gas buyers would suggest there are very strong price incentives for the delivery of Beetaloo gas into the NT market. In addition, the much vaunted gas supply deficit on the east coast of Australia continues to draw closer. Australian investors cannot continue to ignore what is happening globally. Exxon's recent acquisition of Pioneer Natural Resources show that the world's largest energy companies see unconventional gas as a necessary part of their resource portfolio. As they search globally, the Beetaloo's acreage will seem very cheap, especially given its proximity to Asian LNG markets. Okay, to kick things off today, we'll be hearing from Deputy Chief Minister for the Northern Territories, Nicole Manson.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this webinar. On behalf of the Northern Territory Government, we thank you for taking your time to find out more about the exciting activity that is happening around onshore gas development in the Northern Territory right now. The Northern Territory is a great place for investment, and our onshore gas prospects are very exciting. We've done the hard work here in the Northern Territory. We've done an extensive scientific inquiry into onshore gas development. From that inquiry, we deeply consulted with the Northern Territory, with scientific experts and our community to understand how you make sure that you can develop onshore gas in a safe and a sustainable way. From that, we put in place 135 recommendations from that inquiry to ensure that the Northern Territory has world-class regulation when it comes to the development of onshore gas, and to make sure that Territorians have certainty that this gas development is done in a safe and sustainable way. There have been some very exciting exploration results in the Beetaloo. We are very excited about the opportunities for production coming up in the near future. We thank Tamboran and Empire for the great work that they are doing out there in the Beetaloo. We also welcome the fantastic work of APA Group. APA Group will be upgrading the pipeline network here in the Northern Territory, ensuring that we can see more gas from the Beetaloo, not just going to Darwin for export, but also to the east coast of Australia to help meet the energy needs of the Northern Territory, the east coast, and the world. It is an exciting time to be looking at investment in the Northern Territory's onshore gas industry. I thank you for your time and getting to know more about these opportunities.
Next up, we have Corporate Connect research analyst Richard Close. Richard had published research reports on two of the major players in the Beetaloo Basin, Tamboran Resources and Empire Energy. His reports are available and free to download from the CCR website for those that are interested. Richard, welcome to our Beetaloo Basin webinar.
Hi, Paul.
Richard, as an experienced senior research analyst that now covers the key listed players in the basin, we're keen to hear your view on the basin and the future of the basin. Let me start by asking you the following questions. As an introduction to the Beetaloo Basin, can you give us your view on the opportunity the basin represents, focusing on what are the key geological characteristics And what is the potential size of the resource?
Look, the Beetaloo Basin, or more correctly, the Beetaloo Sub-Basin, because it's part of the larger MacArthur Basin in the Northern Territory, represents probably one of the largest undeveloped, unconventional shale gas resources in the world. In terms of size, it rivals the Marcellus Basin, the Utica in the Appalachians in the United States, which of course has driven shale gas production in the United States and changed, I guess, the dynamics of the way the United States relies on energy from the rest of the world, making them, of course, self-reliant. I guess developing the Beetaloo Basin, to my mind, the opportunity that it drives is creating thousands of jobs potentially in the Northern Territory, driving significant economic growth in the Northern Territory and beyond, especially given that we're looking at a looming gas supply demand shortfall on Australia's east coast. The Beetaloo could provide an additional source of gas for LNG export facilities in the Northern Territory, and also to fill up over on the east coast LNG plants, particularly those up in Gladstone. Overall, though, I think in terms of Australia's economics, is the Beetaloo is of such size and of such scope that it can drive down energy costs for ordinary Australians over the longer term, and obviously spur significant manufacturing opportunities.
Yeah, thanks for that. And look, who do you see as the key stakeholders in the development of the Beetaloo?
Look, the key stakeholders, Paul, are obviously the Northern Territory, the people of the Northern Territory, and the government of the Northern Territory. The Beetaloo is really the central tenet to economic development for the Northern Territory, following obviously the significant investment that went into the Northern Territory following Darwin LNG and Impex's. So really the Beetaloo is that next leg, and it also provides the opportunity to supply gas into an increasingly gas-starved Northern Territory economy. The federal government is a stakeholder, and they obviously movements towards the Beetaloo Basin, given they can see the shortage of gas on the east coast looming. The other significant stakeholders are obviously the E&P companies themselves: Empire Energy, Tamboran Resources, Santos, Daly Waters Energy. They are the main explorers and developers in the region. The infrastructure providers, and that really boils down to APA. They're the ones that are going to enable gas getting to market. I guess further out, the other stakeholders are the domestic gas retailers. If we are going to have a shortfall on the east coast of Australia, and I don't think there's any doubt that that's going to happen, the domestic gas retailers play an important role in driving the development, and also, of course, the LNG exporters. Their needs need to be met.
And look, with regards to the ongoing development of the basin, what do you want and expect to see delivered in the coming 12 to 18 months?
Look, primarily, obviously, I guess it's central to the development of the basin is seeing good results come out from drilling, further production testing and flow rate data that will enable the players within the basin to get an understanding of what the type curves look across the basin. That enables them to make longer term plans. Coming up in the shorter term is final investment decision for Empire Energy's pilot plant, potentially by the end of next year. We've got Tamboran Resources and Daly Waters making a final investment decision on their pilot plant probably close to the middle of next year. I'd like to see a continued progression, a positive progression in the cost of drilling and completions in the basin, which is really central to the development of shale gas projects, the way it was done in the United States. And I can see through the continued reduction in the cost of drilling and the cost of completions, as well as that the reduced time to reaching the total depth or the appropriate depths. The other thing is further information on the Middle Arm development. Obviously, there's land being presented to Tamboran for a potential LNG development in the Middle Arm. They've got 12 months. It's currently out to contractors to look at further, design concepts. So we'd look forward to seeing more news from that over the next 12 months.
Richard, many thanks for your time.
No problems at all, Paul. Pleasure as always.
Next up, we have an interview with Alistair Trier, Chairman of the Gas Taskforce from the Department of Chief Minister and Cabinet, Northern Territory Government. We welcome Alistair Trier, Chairman of the Gas Taskforce from the Department of Chief Minister and Cabinet, Northern Territory Government. Alistair, thank you for joining us today for our Beetaloo Basin webinar event.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, first question. The Northern Territory's Gas Taskforce is driving the government's vision for the territory to become a world-class hub for gas production, manufacturing and services. Would you mind telling us about the 5 main points of the strategy and how important the gas strategy is to the Northern Territory's overall economic development?
So the Northern Territory Gas Strategy was put together in about 2018, as you said, 5 points. Notably, the first point is to increase LNG production and increase Darwin's, role in a global scale as a world-class exporter of LNG. Secondly, most importantly for Territorians, is to focus on skills and services and increase our business capability. Thirdly is around looking to establish gas-based manufacturing, and that's all about the Middle Arm precinct. I'll just segue a little bit there, and that was a 2018 view. Since then, we've had the advent of significant policy change around net zero and pathway to net zero by government, industry and our international marketplace. So it's not just gas-based manufacturing anymore. It's around a broad sort of manufacturing mix from a range of energy inputs. The fourth element is around research and development. And finally, and very importantly, Australia's energy security.
Gotcha. And you mentioned earlier the expansion of Darwin's LNG hub is a key part of the strategic plan. What are the main projects driving this expansion?
Right now, we have Santos who, with their DLNG plant. Santos purchased that from ConocoPhillips a few years ago. And we have the world-class INPEX project, both on the Middle Arm Peninsula. And now we're looking to establish potentially further LNG. Tamboran and Empire are players in the Beetaloo, and further LNG, I think, will likely come from the Beetaloo. One of the key advantages of that is the Beetaloo's very low carbon component in their sort of reservoir component makeup. So that's they look to be Beetaloo gas looks to be the next opportunity for LNG production.
And how do you see the proposed Middle Arm project developing?
So it's a multifaceted approach. We're looking at a range of energy types as we transition to net zero by 2050. So, as I said, we've got our existing 2 industry players on Middle Arm with carbon capture storage, and we have significant potential for development of carbon capture. We'll be able to transition the 2 existing industries to a much lower emissions future just through capturing their current carbon that is vented, and that'll make a huge difference straight away. Then with Beetaloo gas coming on board and under the safeguards mechanism and with carbon capture storage, further potential for significantly lower emissions LNG. The real point, though, is that then allows for the expansion of blue industry types over time. So hydrogen and ammonia powered by blue power sources. And to me, that's essential as a step to build the infrastructure both here in Australia and transport and in international marketplace to be able to transition to hydrogen and ammonia type energies. So and then we also have significant solar irradiance within the territory, and that gives us the opportunity to then move to green technologies as the cost curves and the technology make it feasible.
Gotcha. And how does the task force see the development of infrastructure for gas transport out of the Beetaloo?
So the key thing from a Northern Territory government point of view is that we want to ensure that gas from the wellhead can get to market as cheaply as possible. So we're focused on ensuring that the infrastructure, the infield infrastructure and the infrastructure from the Beetaloo Basin, or sub-basin, I should say, to Darwin, and there will be gas going to the East Coast as well, is built and structured in such a way as to minimise costs for transport, basically.
And so just to finish up, overall, how important do you think the development of the Beetaloo Basin is to the Northern Territory's gas strategy and its future?
Well, I'd step back from the gas strategy and say to the Northern Territory's future, the Beetaloo Basin is, this is a well-used word, but a game changer. It is, we haven't seen an opportunity like this in the Northern Territory before. We need to do it responsibly. Gas is controversial in some people's eyes, but in other people's eyes, it's fundamental going forward in the transition. And so I think, need to play our role in ensuring energy security for the Northern Territory, for Australia, but also to our strategic regional partners. And the Beetaloo will play a significant role in all of those things, as long as we manage it responsibly, in line with community expectations in a transition to net zero.
Alistair Trier, many thanks for your time today.
You're welcome.
Next up, I'm speaking with Darren Rogers, Group Executive for Energy Solutions at the APA Group. APA is a leading Australian energy infrastructure business with a $25 billion portfolio of assets delivering essential energy services across all of Australia. APA is a major owner and operator of solar farms and wind farms and a number of Australia's most critical electricity transmission interconnectors. APA also owns and operates some of the nation's most efficient gas-fired power generators and more than 15,000 kilometres of gas pipelines which deliver energy to families and industry across every corner of Australia, including remote grid generation regions. Darren, thanks for joining us today for our Beetaloo Basin webinar event.
No problem. Lovely to be here. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, Darren, to kick things off, what is APA's view of the potential that the Beetaloo represents as a gas resource and development?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Look, probably where I'd start is really the role of gas within the domestic scene. So if we look at the role of gas, we think it's absolutely critical for the ongoing commercial and industrial customers, particularly in the Northern Territory and the East Coast, which is around 90% of the gas used onshore. Another big user of gas, of course, is gas-fired power generation, and particularly for the peaking plants. And those gas peaking plants have an absolutely critical role to play as we bring more renewables into the system, more variable generation. And to ease coal out of the system, we need the certainty of that gas supply to fire those gas-fired power generations when the variable renewable energy is not there. The Beetaloo Basin, good opportunity, vast resource to be developed, early stages, but we do see close interconnectivity with existing infrastructure that can help the development get away. And then there's huge potential to bring much larger and critical infrastructure north to the Darwin Gate, and then also to the east coast.
And how does APA see the development of infrastructure and pipelines specifically as the Beetaloo evolves, and what part will APA play?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Well, what I would say is that we're already a big infrastructure owner in the Northern Territory. So we own the Amadeus gas pipeline, which goes all the way from Darwin right down to the gas fields in Alice Springs. We have the Bonaparte pipeline, which brings essential gas from offshore into the network. We've got around 40 people that work and live in the Northern Territory. And so when we think about the two upstream developers that are very active in the region, that's Tamboran and Empire, they're both different but similar, and the infrastructure requirements they have will be staged. And so our working with both of those partners would lead us to a smaller infrastructure play that would see us connecting their infrastructure in through some connecting infrastructure into existing pipelines, namely the Amadeus gas pipeline. That should allow pretty cost-effective incremental gas to find its way to the market. And that also allows the upstream developers then to do the work, prove the resource up, and then the next phase, as we understand it from those developers, would be a larger scale development that would look to place gas into the Northern Territory and then potentially into the East Coast gas market.
And what commitments, if any, has APA made to the infrastructure scene in the Beetaloo?
Well, other than the existing assets, we've been operating in the Northern Territory since the 1980s. We've developed a number of smaller pipelines and laterals over the years in the Northern Territory. And our support for the Northern Territory really goes to our existing infrastructure and our belief that more gas is needed to come into the market. So we're a long-term asset owner and operator. So the actions we take today will be around for many years to come. And that's the commitment that we give the Northern Territory and also these upstream developers.
On today's webinar, we have two of the major explorers in the Beetaloo, Empire Energy and Tamboran Resources, on the webinar. Is it fair to say that you obviously have long-standing relationships with both Empire and Tamboran?
Yeah, that's right. And so with both businesses, we have MOUs. We're in the early stages of developing what that infrastructure plan would look like. APA is an infrastructure owner. We don't really get into the commodity side of the business. That's really the domain of the resources companies like Tamboran and Empire. But we do see the infrastructure as a really critical link to bring to life the Beetaloo Basin and to get that gas in the system to continue to support those large C&I customers, gas-fired power generation, and be able to bring more renewables into the system.
Darren Rogers, many thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Paul. Much appreciated.
Next up, we have an interview with Empire Energy CEO, Alex Underwood. Welcome back, Alex.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be back.
So, Alex, let's just start. Empire is one of the key players in the Beetaloo Basin, and the company has made significant progress to date. From a company-specific context, tell us about the recent developments for Empire and what we can expect to see coming up.
Yeah, sure. So we have been very active over the last few years. We've done 2 seismic surveys. We've drilled 2 vertical wells and 2 horizontal wells. We've carried out 65 frac stages across one of those verticals and both of the horizontals. Highly encouraging flow rates. We've just recently done some more flow testing on Carpentaria 3H. And all of this work has, first of all, proven up a very significant resource. We now have a 2C contingent resource of around 2 trillion cubic feet of gas, which is a lot of gas, and that's only a small subset of our total resource base. We've also acquired properties on the western side of the Beetaloo from Pangai Resources, so we have about 1 million acres of highly prospective acreage now. Our focus as a company is very much now on moving into a pilot production phase, so essentially installing surface facilities and drilling a small handful of additional wells and looking to put all of that gas into the McArthur River pipeline and hopefully being in production early 2025.
Now, Alex, our webinar today is obviously all about the Beetaloo Basin. The Beetaloo Basin represents a massive gas and potentially liquids opportunity. Tell us about your thoughts on the Beetaloo and what potential you see it delivering as a whole.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it is a very special basin and an incredibly exciting opportunity, not only for our shareholders and those of our neighbours in the basin, but also for Australia and the region. So first of all, this is an absolutely enormous resource. The Northern Territory Geological Survey has estimated that just the Valkyrie B, one of the 4 stacked pay zones in this basin, contains over 500 trillion cubic feet of gas in place. Andrew Liveris, former chairman of Dow Chemicals and now running the Brisbane Olympic Committee, has described it as the 3rd largest shale gas accumulation on Earth. So this is an absolutely enormous resource. But critically, in order to get the gas out of the ground, there need to be a wide range of factors around the rocks that determine whether or not you can extract it economically. And to that end, this is a very special basin. It has been described by us and others as being analogous to some of the most prolific shale gas basins in the US, such as the Marcellus Shale, for example. And so, you've got all the ingredients here to come together to generate a very, very material development. Furthermore, this is a basin that has extremely low CO2 in place. We think that will give this basin a significant competitive advantage against other sources of gas supply. As an example, a number of the offshore gas fields in Australia tend to have CO2 of 15, 20, sometimes even 30% in their overall gas stream. And so for those fields, there will be a significant cost involved in offsetting those CO2 molecules and potentially sequestering them. Whereas with the Beetaloo, in the deepest parts of the basin, it's between 3 and 4% CO2. And where we are, it's less than 1% CO2. So there are a number of factors here that are now coming together, really also facilitated by the work that's been done across the basin, seismic surveys, wells being drilled, that are now demonstrating the commercial case, and we think it has enormous potential. We see that as sources of supply into Australia's east coast start falling away, the Beetaloo can provide the backfill for those declining sources. And also, I think it's important also to think more broadly from a regional context. So, Asia's demand for energy continues to grow every single day, and that's going to continue for decades. And, as in Australia, we are becoming more conscious of our environmental footprint. That's also occurring in Asia. And, gas is going to be a very important source of energy as we start phasing coal out of the system. So it's an incredibly exciting basin to be involved in, and I think it's got a really bright future ahead of it.
Alex, what are your expectations for the development of the basin going forward?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, this basin has enormous potential, and now it's really time to move from that exploration and appraisal phase into production. We see that the basin is likely to be developed in phases. The initial phases will focus on existing pipeline infrastructure. So, as I mentioned, we're looking to put gas into the MacArthur River pipeline under an existing MOU we have with the owner of that pipeline, which is called Power and Water Corporation. Our neighbours in the basin are also looking at supply of gas into existing pipelines. That initial phase will first of all provide more energy for the Northern Territory, mine sites, gas-fired generation, people's homes, but also, seeing gas through to the east coast through existing pipelines, particularly into Mount Isa. The next phase that we see, and this it's not just a prediction of mine, it's based on a lot of work being done by us and Tamboran and APA Group, for example, would involve the construction of much larger pipelines to connect this enormous resource to markets. The initial phase we see is of that expansion plan would involve sending much larger volumes of gas to Australia's east coast. APA has made public announcements about their intentions to potentially build a very large pipeline to connect into Mount Isa. And then also we see longer term a huge opportunity, billions and billions of dollars of value potential in terms of sending more gas to Asia. So there are already 2 existing LNG plants in Darwin. One's operated by INPEX and the other by Santos. Between those 2 plants, there are 3 existing LNG trains in place, but they have the capacity, both of those plants, to grow the number of trains to increase the export of gas to Asia. So, yeah, huge potential, and we see that if we get these phases right, this can be a major energy province.
And Alex, what are your thoughts around government and the other stakeholders in the region?
Yeah, so there are a broad range of stakeholders that are affected by our project and those of the other players in the Beetaloo. We as a company, we're very proud of our track record of working closely with lots of different stakeholder groups. So you've got governments at both the NT and federal level. You've got traditional owners who are incredibly important as the owners of the land on which we operate. You've got pastoral groups, you've got the people of the Northern Territory. What we have found is that through very solid consultation with directly affected stakeholders, we're finding a very strong level of support for what we're doing. And that's really because this can create enormous economic opportunities. During the fracking moratorium a few years ago, ACIL Allen generated a report on their prediction of what this could mean in terms of economic opportunity, and they predicted that just then in terms of the upstream industry itself, that could create around 6,000 jobs for Northern Territorians, which is a large number of jobs for an area of Australia that has a population of around 250,000 people. Of particular importance, this would involve jobs for people in the region. So, opening up a new industry, it gives people more job opportunities, and we're very excited to be part of that. In terms of government support, we've been delighted with the level of support from the NT government. So they went through a very, very detailed and robust process of putting in some of the strictest regulations in the world in place. And we've been operating successfully under that regulatory framework. They see the Beetaloo as, first of all, being a key pillar of their desire to grow their state national product, as they call it, so effectively like gross domestic product to $40 billion by 2030. The federal government, in partnership with the Northern Territory government, have committed $1.5 billion to the further development of a precinct in Darwin Harbour called Middle Arm. So you've got the two existing LNG plants there, but again, this is where gas can be a feedstock to provide a multiplier effect around further activity. The learned experience in the US, where now they have the cheapest gas prices in the world as a result of shale, is that, for every job in the upstream oil and gas sector, you've got a lot more jobs that are created through manufacturing and so on. And so this can create a really sustainable economic future for the people of the NT. And, from the federal government perspective, it's been very pleasing just this week to see ministers of the current government reinforcing the critical role of gas going forward. They're working on a new gas strategy and consulting with various stakeholder groups. And, it's quite clear on the forecast that Beetaloo is going to play an important role in energy security, particularly on the East Coast, when you look at sources of gas like the Bass Strait in serious terminal decline. So, we are delighted with the work we've done with a broad range of stakeholder groups, and we look forward to being a long-term, member of the NT economy and society as we grow our business.
Alex Underwood, many thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Next up, we have an interview with Tamboran Resources CEO Joe Riddell. Joel, welcome back to the network.
Great to be here.
We're talking today about the exciting opportunity the Beetaloo Basin represents, not just for investors and shareholders, but also for NT stakeholders in Australia. Tamboran is a key player in the Beetaloo Basin, and the company has been very active this year with drilling and negotiating offtake and infrastructure agreements with several parties. To start off with, can you give us a quick update on the latest key achievements that Tamboran's had?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been very active over the last 12 months. Operationally, really three key big updates to report. First, as we continue to monitor long-term well tests on our two non-op wells on the east part of the basin, Tamboran 2 and 3. Both the wells have demonstrated long-term well performance that results in seeing recoveries per well consistent with Marcellus type curves up to 18 BCF per well. And really, that bit of data has really guided us toward the drilling location for Shenandoah South. We finished drilling that well a couple months ago. That well was logged in the deepest part of the basin. It logged the deepest, thickest section of the Mid-Valkyrie in the depth center area of the Beetaloo. and we're extremely excited about the opportunity to follow up that drilling with a pilot development that we'll be looking to bring to market in the next couple of years. And then 3, we've had some very good results recently with the TD of our Mungie 3 well. That was a well that we drilled with our new H&P rig that we have in basin now. And that well was drilled in less than 18 days. We drilled a Mungie 2H in 38 days, so we've cut a full 20 days off the drill time. So getting down that learning curve is really what we're really focused on. And I think it really shows how critical getting a modern piece of equipment from the U.S. into Australia and drilling these wells in the Beetaloo. We're already seeing great results. So, on the commercial side, we've equally been very, very focused. We were fortunate to be awarded 440-acre site in Middle Arm by the Northern Territory government. That site is exclusively reserved for new LNG, and we're progressing our LNG strategy. Off the back of that, we also announced MOUs with BP and Shell for 2.2 million tons of LNG for 20 years. And so we're very fortunate to have attracted such a strong, incredible counterparty for that 4.4 million ton total for our LNG strategy. The other thing that we've been focused on is working with retail buyers here on the East Coast, where there are expected shortages for gas happening in the next 5 to 10 years. We've signed MOUs with the 6 largest gas buyers here on the East Coast for up to 875 TJs a day. So over half of the market demand that we'll look to execute on by 2028, 2030. And then finally, we also announced a partnership with APA on really forms the backbone of a business plan that would look at new pipeline from the Beetaloo to Darwin to connect to our LNG strategy, and then on another pipeline that we would connect Beetaloo to the East Coast for significant gas supply that we look to bring on market in that 28 time period.
So it'd be pretty busy.
It's a very busy time, yeah.
So there's no doubt the Beetaloo Basin is evolving as one of the largest untapped gas and liquids resources, not just in Australia, but globally. A couple of questions here. What is your view on the potential the basin represents as a whole?
Well, to your point, this is, I would say, when you look around the world, this is the largest undeveloped gas reserve in the world. So we're very fortunate to have that sitting here right in the Northern Territory here in Australia. And the wells that have been drilled to date in the basin have demonstrated characteristics and signature of rock properties that look very similar to the Marcellus Shale. And so not only is it very large in scale, hundreds of TCF of potential, but it also, we believe, has the rock properties to demonstrate high economic value per well. And that's one of the things that when you look at the experience in the U.S. and all the big shale plays, including the Marcellus, the key aspects, particularly in the core part of basins in the U.S., you've seen very high-performing wells, very high economic wells, so much so that when gas was produced from the Marcellus, it had a significant impact on reducing pricing for customers in the U.S. We think that similar type driving down energy prices can happen here in Australia. So in other words, when this Beetaloo Basin comes on, it really can move the needle for reducing energy cost and therefore cost of living pressures that everyone here in Australia are currently experiencing. The second big thing that we see the Beetaloo being a significant needle-moving aspect, from a needle-moving aspect, we see the basin really having the opportunity to put downward pressure on carbon emissions. Yep. So little known fact is the U.S. is the only Western civilization who has actually met their Paris climate goals. And so one of the reasons they've been able to meet those climate goals is gas coming online primarily from shale gas basins in the U.S. and displacing coal. And we think similarly, gas out of Beetaloo could have equally a very strong effect on reducing carbon emissions on the East Coast, where coal consumption is over half of the energy mix. Yeah. And equally, once this Beetaloo gas ends up via LNG into Asia, we think this gas converted to LNG could displace a lot of coal-fired electricity in Asia as well.
And just on that, what are your expectations for the development of the basin going forward?
So best practice in the U.S. in any major shale play, best practice is to develop in a phased approach. And so 3 phases to our development plan. First is we'll be targeting up to 40 TJs a day through existing infrastructure, getting initial volumes online to ensure that the Northern Territory gas market is well supplied. Any incremental volumes will go to the East Coast beyond that. So it brings new gas production online, which directly includes payment of royalties to our native title holders, to our government. I think psychologically brings the basin into first production. That's something we're focused on very much so here in the next 12 to 24 months. Once we get that first phase online, that will give us confidence to support a phase 2 and phase 3 of the development. And we would anticipate that phase 2 and 3 to be a minimum of 500 TJs a day that we would look to produce to the East Coast, again, to alleviate a lot of the gas shortfalls that are anticipated in the next 4 or 5 years. And then another BCF a day that we would look to develop north to our LNG project to feed into a 6.6 million ton LNG plant that we would hope to have online by 2030.
And what are your thoughts around the infrastructure, government and the other stakeholders?
Incredible amount of support, both from the local Northern Territory government and also the federal government. First, on the NT government, this is a government over the last 6 years have delivered 135 recommendations from the Pepper Inquiry. Those have now been implemented. So I think the NT government deserves a tremendous amount of credit to bring those new regulations and put those in place. It gives industry a lot of security on the back of those 135 recommendations to raise the billions of dollars of new capital required to develop the basin. In addition, Tamboran again has been very fortunate to be awarded a site at Middle Arm. The NT government is incredibly supportive of this Middle Arm sustainable development. This is where not just Tamboran's LNG project will be moving forward, but also a couple of hydrogen projects that are anticipated. There's a critical mineral project in addition to a very large CCS project. So cutting edge, when you think about 21st century energy, the Northern Territory government is right on that cutting edge and bringing the right kinds of energy projects forward. Final thing I'll say is one of the, I guess, misgivings in our industry is having a bit of a boom and bust element to our project development. One of the things, bit of feedback we've heard from the Northern Territory government is, to ensure there is a long-term employment opportunity for Territorians. And so one of the things that we're going to be looking to do in our LNG project is not just talk about 6.6 million tons in phase 1, but having the opportunity to phase in additional trains every couple of years so that when folks want to come and work in the territory, they can see a multi-decade pipeline. And that is something, I've heard that feedback. It's something we're taking into our strategic thinking and our plan, not just develop the first 6.6 million tons, but because of the resource and the Beetaloo being so great, we have the opportunity to continue to leg in additional phases. And that I think will attract some of the biggest talent in the industry into the Darwin area. And we think that's going to be a key driver in uplifting the economy, bringing new jobs, and increasing the quality of life in the Northern Territory.
Joel Riddle, many thanks for your time today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. And to finish up today, we are going to hear from Vice President for Sustainability at Tamboran Resources, Scott Crabtree. Scott, many thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Scott, your role with Tamboran is focused on sustainability. This is obviously a critical part of not just Tamboran's plans for the Beetaloo, but for all other players in the basin.
As you said, sustainability is a really important aspect of Tambrand's strategy and really all companies in the Beetaloo. Tambrand has set a sustainability plan at our IPO, and importantly, that plan is focused on greenhouse gas emissions and our target of net zero scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions by first commercial production. You'll see a lot of companies have set net zero by 2050, but Tambrand has taken a very progressive approach of setting that net zero strategy and net zero target from first commercial production. So roughly 25 years before Australia and the rest of the industry is targeting greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a key part of our strategy. Also, we're looking at other aspects of sustainability, including investment in the community and making sure that dollars we spend are focused on the Northern Territory and specifically around our operating area in Elliott. I'd say over the last 6 months, we've actually spent over 100,000 Australian dollars on community activities in Elliott. A lot of these have been focused on support programs and education. It's something the company is very focused on continuing to make sure that we do invest in the community, we bring jobs and opportunities to the Northern Territory and to Elliott where we're operating.
One of the distinctive factors specific to the Beetaloo Basin is that the resources identified thus far are showing gas that has a much lower CO2 content than industry averages from gas fields in production elsewhere in Australia. How important is this aspect and what does it mean for future development requirements?
It's a great question, and it's something that we like to talk about a lot. Is the reservoir CO2 or the gas actually in ground in the Beetaloo is very low at around 3 to 5%. And when you look at other gas resources and gas projects in the north of Australia, it ranges all the way from 10 to 25%, so significantly higher. So when we're looking at developing the Beetaloo, we really want to make sure that we're communicating that not all gas is created equal. You really need to be looking at the CO2 intensity of the gas and CO2 intensity of the project. And especially now with the federal government safeguard mechanism that is putting a price on carbon, carbon is no longer simply an ESG or sustainability matter. It is a financial metric that the market needs to be valuing. And so low CO2 gas resources, like we have in the Beetaloo, really give Tambrand a financial advantage compared to other operators in terms of the low CO2 nature of the gas. I've mentioned before our net zero scope 1 and 2 strategy, and Tambrand has been able to set that simply because, one, we do have low reservoir CO2 within the Beetaloo, and second, because we are a greenfield operator, we are able to design our facilities now with the carbon price in mind and with our net zero target in mind. So we're able to integrate new technologies, electrification, batteries, low flare technologies to make sure that we keep our emissions as low as possible. So we really see putting a price on carbon as highlighting the really the environmental credentials and the low CO2 nature of the Beetaloo. So it's something we're quite excited about.
And just to finish off, what are some of the other key sort of sustainability deliveries that you're looking to deliver?
That's a great question as well. So I'd probably answer that in two areas. One, Joel mentioned before, is the role of natural gas to displace coal and really reduce greenhouse gas emissions. While it's not Tambrand's emissions, it'd be our customers' emissions. When natural gas is combusted, it has roughly 50% lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to coal for electricity generation. So we really do see that by ensuring a reliable supply of natural gas both on the east coast of Australia and through LNG production, we can make sure that customers have that natural gas available, and it gives them the option of moving away from coal and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The second thing I would say from a kind of broader sustainability perspective is the new technology we're able to bring to the Beetaloo. The rig that we brought into the Northern Territory, the H&P rig, it's able to drill 3-kilometer laterals. And that is really significant from an overall environmental standpoint and surface disturbance. So instead of doing shorter laterals, 1 kilometer, we're able to do 3 kilometers, which means that you have a much lower impact on the environment, much lower impact on the community. One example is our well pads will be about the size of a basketball court, and they'll be able to be 6 kilometers apart, those 3-kilometer laterals. So that'd be equivalent of standing at the Opera House here and trying to see a basketball court over at Manly. That's how far these pads will be able to spread out apart. So you really have that reduction in surface area, and it's overall great for the environment.
Scott Crabtree, many thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
That's all we have time for today. A big thank you to all our presenters today and for everybody attending. Thanks to all of you who have submitted questions. We endeavour to get these answered and back to you as soon as we can. Have a great day.